Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the BMW Update webinar. I am Brandon Matthews here with my colleague Brian Chaff out of the UK, head of BMW for Opus IVS. We are going to dive right into the webinar. We thank you all for joining us. We're going to start with an exclusive webinar offer. That being said, our first webinar offer is a free docking station with the purchase of a Drive Pro ES. The docking station is actually quite cool, connects you via hardline to Ethernet, has 3 USB ports, powers the tool, and of course comes with a power cord as well. So if you don't already have a Drive Pro ES, make sure you buy one. For existing Drive Pro ES customers, we do have a webinar offer as well, and that offer is going to be 25% off the purchase of a docking station. So if you are already a Drive Pro customer, make sure you check out the docking station, as it's a pretty cool addition to the Drive Pro unit. That being said, we're going to jump right into the BMW update presentation, and Brian out of the UK is going to take us through some of the new releases and software developments that will be coming out in short order. I'll let him tell us more about that stuff.
Thank you, Brian. Well, hello everybody. Just want to go over some new improvements that we have on the Drive Pro tool, and obviously Blue Box and Assist Plus. Here is the chassis development. New models being added will be the F41 series, G05 X5 SUV, G07 X7 SUV, the G23 series. Thanks, Brandon, for reminding me that one. And also the G15 8 series and G29 Z4. So this update will include for you the software function on this new release, all ECUs and variants supported for fault codes, quick test, live data, component activations. That will be on every single variant that we showed you. Also, CBS reset will obviously be on every single one of those as well, plus electronic service history write. Now, electronic service history write has been available for a while now, and in the UK and Europe it's used extensively. I'm not too sure how extensively it's used in the US, but it's a very good feature because you can put in all your service data and then you can store it into the iDrive itself. And the customer can see what work's being carried out, and he has the date, the time, who did it, who did the job, the whole thing. Automatic pad mode will be on all vehicles that contain a BDC control module. This will allow you, when you go to clear fault codes, it will automatically turn off the ignition and put the ignition back on once it's done the counter to erase the fault codes. There's improved engine dynamics, which is going to be a much faster rate. So the software is being varied here to make it so the refresh rates are faster than the dealer tool. Check chassis number is going to be is also updated. Re-energize the vehicle, extremely important piece of software this, across those variants as well, and across all the variants that we cover, every single BMW vehicle. Very important piece of software. Maybe Brandon might go over exactly how he's used it when we go through this webinar. And obviously exit transit mode, another great part about it all. And here we go with the new service functions. Quite a few to go through, but obviously brake pad replacement. I could go through the whole list, but you can see there's a large list here of new service functions that are going to be available. And we've taken this list from what the customers have requested on our CRM, all the different areas where they've struggled to carry out service functions before. These will all be added. Now, I'm hoping all these functions, all these facilities will be available by the end of the month. It could be earlier, so always check the tool for, could we have daily updates as well as we have a large major update. So always check and just see what you have that's being given to you on the latest updates. But as you can see, there's a lot of features here, and for me to go through every one of them would take up too much of your time and you'll probably be going to sleep. So the best thing for me is now to carry on with the features we have. And as you can see, EHC01, which is mainly it will be F11, F07. Brandon's also told me some other variants that it's on as well. But the major testing has been on these variants and these models to get this ride height adjustment correct. And I can honestly say to you that we have tested this quite a few times already. Even on my own car, we've tested it, and we now know that testing's gone well. But we want to share this with everyone first, so there'll be people that will be sent this feature, and then they'll be able to test it, and then we will add that as a major update. Improved DOIP handling for BMW. DOIP handling hasn't always been an issue for us as such. What it's been is that the way we're controlling the DOIP handling on the BMW vehicles. And now we have improved software to make this much more slicker. Flash program stability for F-Series vehicles. I know people would say to me, well, when I run CIP and I carry out the CIP and we get to step 4 of 12 or step 4, 14, whatever it goes to, it hangs there for a while. But what it's actually doing is it's counting up every single file update that's been associated with that vehicle since it left the factory, or when it's been updated at a BMW dealership, or it's been updated by an Autologic user. So there could be a long period of time where that hasn't been updated, and that's why it's collecting every single update before it carries on. I know it's a bit frustrating, but that's the only way we can carry on produce this, because we have to record everything that's going on. If we fail to do that, then we fail to help you live by fixing problems. Live data improvements for F-Series. Well, the live data improvements have been, again, that we have now gone through every single F-Series model. We've checked every single piece of live data, and we've checked that to make sure it's accurate. So with it, don't get me wrong, we could still have the odd issue here and there. It's possible. But now the software is working much, much slicker. Update communication issue with E46s. Now, Brandon will be the first one to tell us that, and obviously some of our customers will tell us that they've had issues with E46 steer angle adjustment and that sort of thing. And that's all down to comms, nothing else other than comms. And we believe now that we fixed that comms, and obviously it needs to be out there to be tested. Obviously, there's not a lot of people working on E46s like they were 10 years ago, but we still have a lot of people out there who have access to these vehicles and are working on daily. Flash program stabilization improvements for F-Series. As you know, there's been, and G-Series, mainly on DME variants, where we've been through the software, we've tested the software, and we found that we can improve how the DME variants are programmed to the vehicle. Now, I know there's still some issues because I work on this daily, and I can tell you now we have still a few little bugs that we need to iron out on certain vehicles, and hopefully, as I say, by the end of the month that will be fixed and it will all be out there for you. So over to you, Brandon. Thank you very much, people, and speak to you soon. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you for the updates, Brian. And yeah, I think I'll touch on a couple of those things later, actually. So as of now, we're going to go through just some cool tech tips and a little bit of education for you guys, help you out in the field, because, of course, ultimately the goal is fixing cars and making money doing it, keeping the clientele happy. So one little quick, easy tech tip. A lot of people overlook this, but it's something quite important. I fixed a lot of cars with this knowledge. Pretty simple, but we're going to go over the N55 engine and its cam cover. So there's a few things incorporated into this cam cover which are incorporated into other BMW cam covers, and then there's a couple things that are not incorporated into other vehicles' cam covers. So of course we do have the crankcase ventilation valve in the cam cover, And it's something that I really push customers for. If you guys do not have a digital manometer, you need to get one. This tool is absolutely essential for BMW, and it's very, very useful for non-BMW cars as well. Volkswagen, Audi, a lot of the Mercedes are starting to require crankcase pressure testing, etc. I know Volvo, but for BMW, it's absolutely crucial. And one great thing about BMW versus other manufacturers is BMW actually gives you a set point for nominal crankcase pressures on virtually all of their engines. No other manufacturers do this, to my knowledge. That's something that you would have to gather in the field. But they do give us a nominal value for pretty much all of their engines. For the N55 engine, that nominal value is between 42 and 58 millibar. Okay, and I actually did the math there for you because they give you a particular reading and then they give you a plus minus allowable differentiation. So I did that math for you, made it nice and simple. A digital manometer, you can see it on the right bottom corner of your screen, actually very inexpensive, less than $100 on Amazon or wherever you want to purchase it from. AGA makes a nice little universal European cap there to fit over the oil fill hole. If you want to check from there, you can also make your own tool quite easily just by drilling into a spare oil fill cap and putting a fitting on it. Moving on from crankcase pressure, we get into a fairly unique feature for the N55 valve cover, which is this valve cover has an integrated vacuum reservoir. A lot of people don't know that. I try to circle some of the ports for you guys. In the front there, you find a port for supply coming from the brake booster, and that has a plastic clip-on style hose connection. In the back, back on the passenger side, you will find two small plastic fittings, and those fittings are a little bit hard to find unless you kind of look under the air pipe. The air pipe kind of covers them, goes across the engine and covers those two little fittings. But if you look underneath the air pipe, you're going to find those two plastic fittings. Why that's really important is that is actually an integrated sealed vacuum chamber, which should A, hold vacuum, and B, needs to be tested. That guy I have seen create lots of different fault codes on N55s, the infamous 28 Apple 0 with 101 F01, the throttle angle fault code, as well as low boost faults, etc. Mixture control faults. Those vacuum ports, depending upon vehicle equipment, may run to the vacuum operated exhaust flap and turbo wastegate control for vehicles that have a vacuum operated wastegate. So what I usually do is when you're smoke testing the N55 engine vehicles for vacuum leaks, I recommend smoke testing from the intake manifold as well as from the crankcase. And when smoke testing, I would always recommend that you remove the vacuum lines or vacuum caps going to those vacuum ports. And if any smoke escapes from the fittings, the valve cover is internally micro cracked and should be replaced. Alternatively, you could also hook up a manual vacuum gauge and test that vacuum reservoir to ensure that it holds. So that about covers the N55 valve cover. Move on to another, this slide is more of an informational slide than it is a tip slide, but if you guys are familiar with the radiator shutters on some of the F chassis cars like the F10, etc., that function has been further developed for G chassis cars and is extraordinarily both useful and unfortunately becoming pretty problematic. Okay, lots of service bulletins related to the G series as well as warranty extensions. So I wanted to make a list for you guys so you can screenshot it or write it down. You can see which chassis have service information bulletins and which chassis have warranty extensions. Okay. The radiator shutters are a pretty cool feature in my opinion. Basically control airflow to the radiator and the engine while managing heat inside of the engine room. So if we collect and keep heat in the engine room, this makes warm up quicker, especially for vehicles that are being started and stopped frequently. And furthermore, we can close the flaps at higher speed to reduce drag and improve aerodynamics, which is obviously great for fuel economy and performance. Additionally, I wanted to cover a quick couple changes that were made with regards to the third generation of active air flaps, which is what we see here on the G chassis. These cars consider more variables for operation of the air flaps than did the previous air flaps on F chassis. So temperature values alone, the G chassis cars will consider temperature value of the cooling system, temperature value of the engine oil, temperature value of the transmission oil, temperature value of the air conditioning compressor pump, temperature value of the catalyst, as well as temperature value of the charge air system. Okay. Temperature value is, of course, not the only influencing factor. Other factors include current going to the map element of the engine thermostat. We have load signal from the DME, engine speed, vehicle speed from the DSC, cooling fan speed, and of course, trailer recognition. So if the car has a trailer hooked up to it and it's towing, cooling is going to be a priority as opposed to aerodynamics. So just some things to keep in mind when diagnosing air flap issues. The connection to the air flap really hasn't changed from the F bodies. We are still going to have a terminal supply for voltage, a earth wire, and a LIN bus signal for control wired to the DME. So that really hasn't changed, but the influencing factors for control has changed. So I wanted to update you guys there, as well as provide you with all of the bulletin numbers. If you don't have access to bulletins, that's where your Opus IVS subscription comes into play. Let us know. And of course, we can provide you with any necessary SIBs. That being said, I think I'm going to hand it back over to Brian so he can get some more FaceTime and voice control. He'll take us through another tech tip for you guys.
Thank you, Brandon. Yes, we have here a mini F56 radiator fan check control message. So you would get this as a check control message on the screen regarding the fan, radiator fan itself. And this isn't always the issue. There is a fault there, but the fault is regarding an error in the software of the DME causes a misdiagnosis of the electronic radiator cooling fan. So as you can see, the repair there is to carry out a quick test of the vehicle and see if there's any fault entries. If there is fault entries, obviously we have to repair those fault entries first, because there will be a fault in that system that is recognized. Now the second one is you have the check messages, but there is no faults. That's when we have to then carry out a update on the engine control module. And when we've done that, it will obviously then fix that problem that we have with these check messages. Thank you, Brandon. Back to you.
All right. I'm going to actually continue on with a similar fault code that I see a ton of lately. This fault code is applicable for pretty much all of the mini F5X chassis vehicles. So the F54, F55, F56, and F57 chassis. Very common for a CEL to be illuminated. You will have a fault present or stored in the DME for LIN bus communication with the EAC center. This is super common, something I've seen a lot of. There is a SIB for this fault code, and of course, if you need that, let us know. But I've pretty much given you all the information on this slide. Kind of an odd presentation of a fault code. First time I read it, was a little bit of a head scratcher. I went, okay, that's interesting, and probably something that would have been extraordinarily difficult to find out if some BMW engineer didn't do analysis of the returned parts. But what we have going on here is the chemical composition of the radiator fan shroud will actually contaminate the EAC sensor. EAC stands for environmental air catalyst. A lot of people are familiar with this already. This was present on the E46 vehicles equipped with the M56 engine, as well as the E9X vehicles equipped with the N51 engine. So the SULEV variants, basically. They come with a ozone reduction coated radiator, which essentially cleans the air, cleans the environment. So what's going on here, like I said, is the composition of the fan shroud is actually contaminating that sensor. The fix for this is to replace both the radiator, because the radiator has the integrated EAC sensor, which is not sold separately, as well as replace the fan shroud. Now, like I said, if BMW hadn't done their due diligence and analyzed the warranty and return parts, it's unlikely that someone would have found the fan shroud to be the underlying root cause of failed sensors. Most people would be replacing the radiators, car would go down the road, and who knows, a month, 2 months, a year later, same fault code, replace the radiator again, fixes the car temporarily, etc. So I'm actually grateful that BMW does their homework to get to the root cause. Now, I did provide you with the fan shroud part numbers of both the problematic shroud as well as the updated version. So those should be on the bottom of the screen there for you. And the other thing I provided you was the top picture. Although a little bit difficult to see, it's the best picture you could get. And this is what you guys will see on the car. So it's a realistic picture. If you look down at the fan shroud from the engine room, you can see this bluish, light bluish sticker that will actually have the part number on it. So if you guys are getting this fault code, you can check that sticker to see if it has the problematic shroud. And if so, you know you're likely on the right track. Now, I do want to mention that I don't prefer to shotgun things. So if you get this fault code, you still want to do some checking. The EAC sensor is a 3-wire sensor. It has a supply voltage of battery volts, an earth, and a LIN wire. That LIN wire is on the same circuit as several other components that connect to the DME. So I would highly recommend that you use an oscilloscope and check the LIN signal before we get into replacing any component parts, as well as, of course, checking your power and your ground supply to the EAC sensor. Moving on from there, I'm going to take you into another cool tech tip, as well as an awesome function of the Opus/AutoLogic scan tools, which is something that a lot of the other scan tools on the market simply don't offer. And that is conversions and retrofits. This particular conversion is very common. It works for a lot of different chassis. So as we can see on the top of the slide, this conversion is working for the F07, the F10, the F12, and the F13 chassis with an N63 engine produced up to June of 2011. It is also fully applicable for F01, F02, F04 chassis with the same N63 engine up to production date of August 2011. Okay. And lastly, for several chassis, again, F07, F10, F12, and F13 with the N55 inline 6-cylinder engine with production date up to 03 of 2012, which I believe is when they switched from the rotary style Continental high pressure fuel pump to the single plunger piston style high pressure fuel pump produced by Bosch. Okay. And what this conversion does is this conversion raises low side fuel pressure when needed, not all of the time, but when needed to prevent vapor formation in the fuel system. Okay. This will raise low side fuel pressure when needed for the N63 variants up to 5.9 bar, and for the N55 variants up to 5.8 bar. Okay. It is important to note that in most instances, this conversion actually requires replacement of the fuel pump assembly in addition to performing the actual conversion with the scan tool. So it's not like you guys just do the conversion and all is good. We likely need to be replacing the low pressure pump and performing the conversion. Okay. The conversion is fairly easy to perform. All right. What we're going to do is we're going to use the scan tool. We're going to go into Legacy, or if you're using a blue box or an assist, you'll just connect directly to the car, determine the vehicle automatically. I would prefer you to run a quick test first and then back out of the quick test. After you do that, there will be a button on the main page that says retrofits. Okay. We'll enter the retrofits menu and we will comb through the list of available retrofits and conversions until we find the conversion for fuel feed pressure. Okay. There is a note about it in the scan tool as well, which is awesome, which kind of covers what I just did cover with regards to what vehicles and production ranges it's applicable for. All right. And we're going to simply press the add button. We are going to make sure the car is prepared before we select the add button. So we're going to have key on engine off with the seatbelt plugged in, the headlights switched to the manual on position, which will be turning the knob all the way to the right side, and we'll have a power supply on the car. Okay. And I hope you guys do see the value in investing in an actual power supply unit, a battery support unit, rather than just a charger. Okay. But that's a whole different topic. So we'll simply select add button. The retrofit will be performed successfully. You'll get a confirmation message of that, and done deal. Now, here is a awesome tip for you guys with regards to retrofits, conversions, etc. Our tool does have the ability to display the vehicle order. Okay. And I encourage this whenever doing a retrofit, both one, to check and see if that retrofit was maybe already done to the vehicle and you don't need to perform it again, or two, to confirm that the retrofit was completed successfully. All right. So what we're going to do here is we're once again going to use the legacy software with the Drive Pro or with the Assist Plus and Blue Box, connect directly, determine the vehicle, and we'll go back into the retrofits tab. Once we go back into the retrofits tab, there will be a button that says display vehicle order. And I'll show you that on the previous slide. On the left side of your screen at the bottom, you'll see a screenshot and you'll actually see a small yellow arrow. And that button is to display the vehicle order, which will then take you to a page like this. And here we can see model series, time criteria, paint code, all of the SA numbers. So all of the option codes for the car. Also useful if you guys need to find out if the car is equipped with some kind of option code and you're not sure, does it have adaptive xenon lighting or LED main lighting or simple halogen lighting, etc. We can check the option codes there, as well as we could compare that to the original vehicle order, which AutoLogic / Opus can provide for you if you don't have access to BMW TIS. Okay, in this instance, the scan tool, after performing the conversion, is going to add the E word, or in German, E Wort, KV01. And that will be added again to the E words field. So after performing the conversion, go into display the vehicle order and make sure that KV01 was added to the E Wort field. Or perhaps you want to check before doing the conversion to see if it was already added. Now, this conversion addresses a lot of different problems with the car, okay? These engines can exhibit difficulty starting up on cold start, as well as high pressure fuel pump plausibility faults, as well as mixture control faults, rail pressure sensor signal permanently stuck faults, as well as sometimes even noticeable driving symptoms. So rough running and drivability complaints on startup. Definitely something to watch out for. All right. Now, moving on from the retrofit and conversion, I'm going to take you guys to a cool thing that I actually recently provided support to one of our customers on, which is an intermittent no crank condition on BMW X1s, specifically the F48 chassis. So far, I've only seen this on the F48 chassis. I would be interested to know if it affects other vehicles as well. I'm going to keep an eye out on that and adjust my notes accordingly. But what I've seen lately on a lot of the F48 chassis is an intermittent no crank. And this is actually caused by a faulty starter motor. Okay. This affects a range of the X1 cars. If I remember correctly, I believe it is from October of 2016 to March of 2018. And what you'll find is an intermittent no crank condition, and almost always have I seen a fault code registered. That fault code can be in the body domain controller, if it's a late model F48, in the front electronics module, FEM, if it's a mid-range F48, or in the CAS, if it's an early F48. The fault code description is always similar. It's always a current overload for the KL50L driver. And as most of you BMW technicians know, 50L is going to be the terminal control to the starter motor solenoid. So this is the small wire which energizes the solenoid to engage the starter motor. I recently had a case where a customer had the fault code, replaced the FEM, programmed it with AutoLogic, wrote over the vehicle order, copied over the vehicle order from the old FEM, and car left, and a week later came back and had the same fault code and the same symptom. Put in a support request case with us, and I dove into it, and we figured out that there was a faulty starter motor. One kind of cool little thing that BMW did for us with regards to this complaint is they actually did a technical update on the part itself. And they denote that with a green dot on the starter motor. They also denote that with an index number. So the upgraded starter motor will have an index number of 07 or higher. And I also provided you with the part number for that upgraded starter motor as well. Now, that brings me to just a cool little interesting factoid, which is you've been probably seeing this a lot lately on BMW and Mini and Rolls-Royce vehicles, where parts updates, improvements in parts manufacturing is being noted with an index number. So this is something, you know, we've seen quite a bit of now. Everyone's familiar with the N54 piezo injectors that got, what, 12 different index number updates, but we're seeing this on a lot of parts for BMW. Tank venting valves, aka purge valves, starter motors, fuel injectors, you name it. A lot of parts are coming with index number updates. A lot of the mini valve covers, so I believe the B38 and B48 mini valve covers have been updated a few times, noted by an index number revision. So definitely keep an eye on that. And once again, you can contact Opus IVS tech support for that index number information if we ever run into a part update. So keep an eye out. I know a big one recently is the tank venting valves for a lot of the B series BMW and Mini engines. They've gone through quite a lot of revisions, several to my knowledge, where the tank vent valve is having intermittent sticking issues, creating mixture faults, as well as evap system leak faults. I think one of Brian's colleagues, if I'm not mistaken, Simon in the UK, put that in one of the webinars he did for you guys with regards to mini fault codes and a tank vent valve revision. Is that right, Brian, with Simon?
That's correct. It was Simon. Yeah, Simon.
All right. Awesome. Okay. I think the last tech tip I have for you guys is a quite interesting one. So one of the things that Brian didn't cover when he had that big old list of all of the new functions that are being developed for some of the new chassis, and there was a big old list on the screen. One of the things that was in that list was component protection unlock for head units. And I thought that was quite interesting because when we were making our slides, I read Brian's and I went, oh, that's so interesting because I made a component protection slide for this webinar. Now, I think it's really important to note, Brian had made note that we are working on and should have developed soon a component protection unlock for replacement head units. Now, I want to differentiate that between my slide. What Brian was referring to is our software will be able to unlock new head units, particularly head unit high, after replacement, as well as unlock component protection after replacement of the BDC, the body domain controller, right? So after replacement of one of those components, the head unit will have component protection on it and needs to be unlocked, basically. I, on my slide, have a very similar tech tip for you guys, but fundamentally different in that my slide is based on component protection of people interchanging head units or components on BMW. I'm sure you guys, I mean, everyone does it in the field. They swap parts for diagnostics, play Swaptronics, testing components. Oh, I don't have a radio working in this car. Let me plug in the radio from a donor car just to see if it'll have sound or if it communicates, if there's a bus issue, etc. All good, great, grand, wonderful. Testing first is my recommendation, but we need to start being extremely cautious with swapping components on BMWs. We, particularly me, but we at Opus, I've been gathering a list of components which are not swappable from car to car, okay? And when I say not swappable, I genuinely mean do not swap them, even for testing purposes, okay? This started with the NBT Next Big Thing Evo and Entry Nav Evo head units. These components are not swappable from vehicle to vehicle. If you swap an NBT Evo or an Entry Nav Evo from one vehicle to another vehicle, not only will it not work for the vehicle that you put it in, it will no longer work for the vehicle that it came out of. As soon as the vehicle recognizes a different VIN number in that component, it will actually disable all of the FSC and SWT enabling codes in that head unit. So when you put it back into the car that it came out of, it will now have component protection and it will not function correctly. And you will actually get a no signal error or a component lock error message on the CID, on the central information display, and that component will no longer work in that vehicle. And that is not easily fixable. In fact, it's not fixable with an AutoLogic and not fixable with ISTA. Once this happens, even BMW dealerships cannot fix this. They have to submit a SARA case with BMW AG in Germany, and BMW AG has to create new FSC and SWT codes for that component that was locked out. And then after those codes are created, they will either import them with an IRAP session or they will supply them to the dealership to import with ISTA. But many of them cannot be imported with ISTA and requires an IRAP session. So BMW AG actually has to remote into that vehicle to fix that locked out head unit. they're using a system now called Trusted VIN, basically. And that function applies to other components as well. The NBT Evo and the Entry Nav Evo are the first two units that I was aware of that got them. However, there are others, including BDC, etc. So we really need to be extremely careful when swapping modules. If you guys are unsure, you definitely need to put in a support ticket with us so that we can guide you and provide the best assistance with regards to whether it is okay for testing, it's not okay for testing, and the best method in doing so. Because although swapping components can be useful, it's not always the best method. So we need to be very, very careful, okay? Because these will render control units unusable and the car will have to go to the dealer. Secondly, I've also heard of several cases lately where the dealers will not even they cannot get BMW to even consider doing an IRAP session, right? BMW AG will simply say no, and they will force the dealership to sell a new component to the customer. I've also heard this lately on SCR lockouts for the M57 engines. If the customer exceeds mileage for the DEF injection system and the vehicle gets locked out and the one-time reset has already been used, BMW is not reviving those vehicles any longer with an IRAP session. They're simply forcing the dealership to sell new digital diesel electronic control units. So we need to be very, very careful with the SCR lockout and then now with swapping components. A lot of people are familiar with component protection already. And if you're looking at the slide, you'll probably look and say, oh, why does he have a little Audi or a VW logo on the slide? Well, that's why, because Audi and VW have had component protection for a long time, right? In that the components that are replaced require component protection removal, which needs an LSID and has to be done while connected to Volkswagen Audi server in Germany, etc. Well, BMW basically took that a step further and said, if you guys are swapping components from car to car, we're going to physically lock that component out and render it useless, right? In the head unit, so the most common module that I've seen that on lately is head units, right? And they're trying to prevent theft, of course, which, believe it or not, does happen a lot more than you would expect. When you have a component protection lockout, you will generally have a fault code. In the head unit high, NBT Evo or Entry Nav Evo basic, you will have a fault code, and I believe, if memory serves me correctly, that fault code is B as in boy, 7, F as in Frank, 8, 7, A as in apple. So B7F 87A. And that fault code will say burglary actively registered / component protection active. And that basically means that the component is locked out, okay? You might also have that fault code if you replace the component with a new unit, but if it is a new unit, that is something that ISTA can remedy by importing enabling codes, or as Brian said, we will have that function shortly, hopefully by the end of the month. Give us a little leeway with that sometime in the near future. Okay. Now, like I said, other modules have component protection, body domain controllers, etc. Another component that I've seen actually lately not work when swapping from vehicle to vehicle is amplifiers. Amplifiers on F chassis cars, although they won't lock out, they won't necessarily work once a different VIN is registered. So if you guys are having an audio system issue and you're swapping amplifiers from car to car on F chassis, be a little cautious of this and contact Opus IVS support first. Hopefully that gave you guys a lot of tech tips and kept you in the loop with regards to all of the BMW updates that are coming soon from us. Hopefully you guys submitted a lot of questions because I want to answer them for you. I would also like you, most of you have my email or Brian's email. If you guys want us to cover something specific in these webinars, please let us know. If you want tech tips, or if you want training on a particular system, or you want help using the diagnostic platform / scan tool, let us know what you're looking for in the webinar so that we can tailor them to your guys' needs. Anything else to add, Brian, before we get into the Q&A portion of the webinar?
Not really, Brandon. I think you've covered most of it. I think you've covered it very well. And I think, yeah, we need to see what questions we have. Thank you.
All right, guys. So first question. Can you just code a headlight module, or do you need to do a platform update?
Brandon, do you want to answer that one, or do you want me to answer it?
I will answer it, and I'll let Brian tack on to the end because my answer is a little bit involved. So it is becoming more and more complicated with regards to complete vehicle updates versus individual component coding and updating. For the most part, coding a headlight module individually is completely acceptable, but on occasion it is not. This gets complicated. It's hard to answer in a single word, and that is actually not just for a headlight control unit, but for any control unit. Selective updating versus individual versus complete car. The best piece of advice that I have for everyone out there is to contact us, right? There are many, many, many times when coding or updating an individual module is a-okay, right? No problem whatsoever. And there are other times when it is best to do a complete vehicle update. I'll give you one example. Let's say we have some strange Bluetooth issue where the customer is saying, you know, a vehicle owner brings in the car and says, hey, every once in a while my Bluetooth connection doesn't function correctly, or I can't stream music from my phone through the car's stereo system intermittently, or something like this. And you guys get a vehicle in, and obviously you don't find anything obvious. There's not really any relevant fault codes. You don't really know what direction to go in. That car is very likely a perfect candidate for a complete vehicle update. Where on the other hand, the example was a headlight, or let's say a fuel pump control unit, or a tire pressure RDC module. Most of the time, those components are just fine to install and code an individual unit. And then, that said, there's a lot of gray area between those two examples. So it's hard to answer directly, but I think the best thing to do there is definitely refer to us. We can talk you through it and decipher the best plan for your specific situation. I think Brian probably has a little bit to add on to that, considering he's the software guy. He's the guru.
What I would say is that there's a line of rule, and the rule is, you, as Brandon says, you contact Opus tech support for help in any of these. If you don't want to go ahead and do it first, but a headlight module is a very open subject, again, as Brandon said, because there's lots of different types of modules that are fitted to these vehicles, and they can conflict when coding. So you might have to code both headlight modules. But my rule would be, if you want to go ahead and code it, if you code it and it adversely affects the vehicle in some way or doesn't work, then obviously you need to contact Opus and then tech support system, and they will then guide you through and find out what you've done first. Now, a lot of times when you code something, you fit it to the vehicle, you initialize the thing, it's done. You check the vehicle out, check all the lighting system, and it works fine. But if it doesn't, that's the time you need to contact Opus tech support for guidance.
I think that was a great comment, Brian. I want to actually add on to that. I would rather see our partners code or program an individual module and have to deal with the aftermath if there is a software conflict, as it's much easier to deal with something like this. So for example, let's say we update a DME and we let the car go to sleep and we drive the car, and now we have some kind of interface fault in the EGS transmission module. a CAN fault or a missing message fault, and it doesn't go away after a sleep cycle or a battery reset, and there seems to be no easy solution for it. The easy solution would be, okay, well then let's update the EGS module, which will then match the I step of the DME and the EGS. This is a much better and safer method than it would be just to blindly update the whole car in one shot, as blindly updating the car or even knowingly updating the whole car is risky. It's risky with an AutoLogic. It's risky with BMW ISTA. I can't tell you how many cars I've had to recover for our clients using ISTA that failed to program. BDC modules, head units, instrument clusters, I mean, you name it. These cars crash during programming, and it's not an AutoLogic thing or an ISTA thing. It is a car issue. I mean, it is a module specific. I mean, there are risky modules, there are not risky modules, etc. A lot of that risk can be mitigated by doing things correctly, either selectively programming or individually coding or programming with an AutoLogic / Opus tool, or correctly connecting the ICOM and making sure your laptop doesn't power down and go to sleep in the middle of programming. There are a lot of ways to mitigate risk, but even with all risk mitigated, there is, or as much risk mitigated as possible, there's always risk. So I would urge you to A, rely on tech support, or B, be a minimalist at first, and we can always correct issues after the fact.
Yeah, because what would happen there is that by contacting the tech support team, they would probably look, let's take DME or an EGS as an example. They would then look at what's on that bus and update the whole bus. Sometimes that has to be done to be able to rectify the problem, put that whole bus on the same eye level. That sometimes happens, but you'd know that from a road test of the vehicle, how it performs, or how that ECU performs, or how other ECUs perform which are on that bus. But being a headlight module, I don't see why you couldn't code it and then check functionality. Once it's been coded, it needs to be initialized. Once it's been initialized, how does it work? Does it work? Yes or no? Doesn't work, doesn't do anything, then contact tech support and they will guide you. And now you have a log in your tool. The tool has automatically logged that procedure. So the software can then look at that and say, okay, we now see the problem. We need to update the whole vehicle, or we need to update certain ones on that bus. That's the way forward. And that's the beauty of being an Opus IVS user. Thank you.
Okay. Our next question is, why do air flip codes not clear without a test drive?
Why do, sorry?
Why do air flip? Was it?
I think it's a typo. It's probably air flap.
Air flap codes not clear without a test drive.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Brandon, do you want to answer that one?
Go ahead, Brian. I got something to add right after you. You go, actually. An interesting bit.
Sometimes what happens is that the data is not recorded from any sensor or motor or stepper motor. So therefore, what has to happen is it has to run through a full cycle. And when that full cycle is registered within the ECU, then it calculates the next step. Did that answer that correctly, or do you want to answer that?
I think it did, actually, Brian. I think that's exactly right. Sometimes a function doesn't run, or data isn't calculated until a road test. You're seeing a lot of road tests necessary for clearing a lot of fault codes. SAA permanent faults, for example, often require drive cycles or road testing. What I was going to add was actually a little factoid that Brian taught me when I actually meant to mention it during the slide that I had about the G-Series active air flaps. So just an interesting bit of information. Those air flaps during a programming session of the vehicle, for example, if you're programming several control units, those active air flaps will actually open and close approximately 30 times as the programming is taking place. So just a cool little bit of information that I thought was interesting that Brian taught me earlier. I wanted to share with you guys as well.
Okay, Gina, is there any more questions?
Yes. Will there ever be the function to program head units, or will it only ever be possible with ISTA?
Never say never, but at the present moment, we can't do it. So I'm not going to say never, because we're working on things day in, day out, and that is an issue that we want to get past. But it's going to take a lot of effort from in-house to be able to solve that problem. I don't want to go into too many details, but that's the issue we have. And I believe we will succeed in doing this, but it's going to take a little while for us to get to it. But I'm hoping something will be worked out. Maybe in our next webinar, I can explain more of where we are. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and it's been a thorn in my side for a long time.
I think that's a difficult one too, in all honesty, because even using ISTA and ICOM, head units are one of the most common components to fail to program. So much so that there are countless Puma cases and Tasser cases where BMW AG is remoting into these vehicles with an IRAP session and recovering head units that failed to program. And that is one of the small, albeit advantages that the dealer has over the independent. And I don't think that that will ever change, unfortunately, is they have access to BMW AG remoting in and performing functions that are not possible even with the factory tool, right? So if the dealership is programming a vehicle and a head unit goes into programming abort, not all is lost. BMW AG can remote in, perform an IRAP session, even though it takes a lot of work. They have to shut down a full server for it, etc. BMW AG will recover that head unit. That is simply an advantage that they have being BMW. So I think that's a difficult question and a difficult hurdle to overcome, because that is a extremely common module to fail, even with the factory software.
Absolutely right. But what it is all, we have to put a lot of infrastructure into the business to be able to support people programming instrument clusters, CICs, MBTs. To be able to do that is a lot of infrastructure to be able to support you and support you quickly within a reasonable time. And that's something, obviously, now, not only do we have to get the software right, we have to get the infrastructure right. And until we do that, we can't really support it properly.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question?
Yes, please do.
Yeah.
Right. How long does it take for ambient temperature to filter after it has been unplugged due to front bumper removal?
That's a very good question. I like that one. What happens is, for that to be re-registered correctly, it would take, I would think, something in the region of about a 10-mile road run. Because once that's disconnected, there's a lot of data used from that sensor around the vehicle. One sensor controls quite a lot. So the answer would be, there is no simple way of just resetting the fault code, working out whether the sensor's faulty, or the wiring, open circuit in the wiring, or about poor plug connection, where it sits. But the answer would be is there's no easy way. You can't pre-run that. There is no piece of software we could give you that go, this automatically sets this for you. So unfortunately, it's going to be a road test. There is no other way. Brandon, do you want to answer that any more on that?
I think that was exactly right. I've seen them I've seen some vehicles, some chassis where it goes fairly quickly, but most chassis that I've seen definitely require somewhat of an extended road test to start registering ambient temp correctly.
Gina, do you have any more?
We do. How long does a full platform update take?
Oh,
This depends.
that's a really hard question to answer, but how many ECUs are in there that need updating? That's the first one.
As an example, I did one for a customer of ours in Texas last week. I actually recorded the entire session. I was remoted into his laptop. We were using an ICOM. It was on an X3. That was probably a mid-level X3. Maybe had, 12 modules to program, including a head unit high. And I recorded that session for 11 and a half hours. I actually had to go home, tether my laptop to my phone just so the session wouldn't stop, and finish when I got home. So it can take quite a while, but it does depend heavily on what modules are being updated and how many of them there are.
Brandon, was that an E or was that an E series vehicle?
No, that was an F chassis vehicle.
Okay. So obviously the answer to that is how many ECUs need updating, which ECUs need updating, because they all have different data packs. So, the amount of updates that are required. When was it last updated? When was that version, the eye-level version, put in there? This all affects the time it's going to take to update that vehicle.
I think as well as laptop and internet latency and speed as well, right?
One thing, using, it's a very difficult question to answer because we don't know, because what vehicle are you on? How many ECUs are on that vehicle? You have an M5 come in or something, and you've got 50 ECUs to update. That's going to take a while. Yeah? Think about having your lunch in the meantime. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to make this one the last question. According to ISTA, I was informed to drive the vehicle above 50 miles per hour for 10 minutes or more. Is this true?
For what? What was that for? Is that for doing the calibration of the sensor?
I think this was a follow-up question to the ambient temperature filter.
Okay, so what do they say? What does ISTA say?
It says, according to ISTA, I was informed to drive the vehicle above 50 miles per hour for 10 minutes or more. Is this true?
It sounds about right. How long does it take to reset the RDC? It's once that calibrating data is performed within the ECUs that it needs to see, that's when it will be finished. There's no initialization set procedure. If that's what BMW is saying, who are we to argue? If that's what BMW say you need to do, you need to do it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that plays into a few things that I get asked a lot. Like, example, you code a fuel pump control unit and you get a prompt after to let the vehicle go to sleep. Does everyone do that? No. Should they? Yes. If they don't, is it necessarily problematic? No, not always. But is it sometimes problematic? Yes. So, if ISTA's recommending it or if we recommend it, I would personally recommend doing it. Does it mean if you don't that the sky is going to fall? Not always, but there's some kind of validity to the statement or they wouldn't have made it. So I agree with Brian. If ISTA prompts you to do something, I would follow directions, right? Always best to follow directions than to skip directions and wind up with an issue later.
A great example of that is EGR installation mode. If you're carrying out EGR installation mode and you put it into the vehicle, you must, after completing it, you must let the vehicle go to sleep 100%. Otherwise, it will not be registered. That vehicle must go to sleep. So there's a great example. Change an EGR valve, you need to put it into EGR installation mode. Once you've completed it, once you've come out of that, you must let the vehicle go to sleep.
All right.
I think oh, sorry, Gina, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, I think the last comment that I have, I mentioned earlier, but if you guys have suggestions for webinar content, please, 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 please send them my way or Brian's way, because we want to make sure we're giving you guys info that you're after.
Absolutely.
It looks like we have one more question that to be answered. How many flag hours should we be charging the customer for individual module updates, a complete bus system update, and or a full vehicle update?
That's again, that's a very difficult question to answer. Again, why I say that is because if you're doing one ECU, which ECU is that? Which module is it? Because some modules take longer than others. So I would always look at it the way that you pay for this equipment to be used. You have to make it a benefit for your shop. How do you make that a benefit to your shop? You charge for it. You charge the correct rates that you believe are right for the job. An honest way of looking at it would be you do one module and it took an hour to do, then you take in consideration your equipment, the price of your equipment, the amount of time it took you to do it, and then you evaluate a good price for that job. That's the only answer I could give you. I don't know anything else to say really on that subject. What do you think, Brandon?
I think it's absolutely important to charge for any type of coding or programming, diagnostic work. We want to be fair to our clients, right? Because we want to be fair. We don't want to overcharge. We don't want to look bad. But at the same time, we're all doing this trying to make a living. And there's risk involved, right? There's risk involved with coding and programming. There's knowledge involved. There's investment in equipment and in technical support. Let's say you guys are putting in a technical support case and I'm programming a module for you and you're working on something else. You are still paying, essentially us a monthly subscription fee to get that support. And that needs to be charged to the customer ultimately in the form of charging for the software update or the coding, etc. I mean, again, I can't really answer that as Brian can't, but a general rule of thumb for me would be 1 hour minimum for any type of basic coding, right? So if you're, if you fitted a new control module and it requires coding and some type of initialization, let's say you fitted an RDC module, I would charge 1 extra labor hour for encoding that module as well as initializing it during a road test. Programming, probably want to go a little bit higher than that. Something like a complete vehicle update, I would definitely be charging several hours of labor to do something like this. I think the days of charging 1 hour to do a complete vehicle update, are well outdated. In my opinion, 2, 3, possibly even 4 hours in some circumstances is not out of the question. If I might remind you, I just said a moment ago that it took me 11 hours to program one vehicle. Granted, I'm not sitting there doing things the entire time, but it does take quite a lot of time and there's a lot of risk involved. So I think we need to be compensated accordingly.
There's two things in this, Brandon, as you quite rightly say. The two things are this: when you're programming a vehicle, you don't have to stand over it. You set the vehicle up for programming, you could walk away. The other part would be, if that was an issue for you, how about if we supply you with a programming tool? How about if we give you CIP on a separate tool? It's a thought. And that's fairly easy for us to do. So it's a thought to everybody who's listening to this webinar right now. Is that what you're looking for? Because if it is, then we can supply it. Now you can walk away. You can set that tool, use your tool for diagnostics. So you have a separate tool you're using for diagnostics, and it can also do CIP. And you have a separate programming tool. We did this a long time ago. We produced a tool like that a long time ago, and it was a big success. So if people out there think they believe it's the right way forward, then please let us know. We're here to help. When that helps you, helps us. Thank you.
All right. That was great. Thank you, guys. So that's about all the time we have today. If you have any additional questions, email us at webinars@opusibs.com. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. And
Thank
stay
you,
safe.
Brian.
Stay safe.
Everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.